Why you feel guilty for living your own life. That weight in your chest when you choose yourself over others' expectations. That voice whispering you're being selfish when you say no to things that drain you. That nagging feeling that pursuing your own path makes you a bad person. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this guilt wasn't random. It wasn't a character flaw or moral weakness. It was something much more sinister, a psychological prison designed to keep you serving everyone else's will while abandoning your own. Have you ever noticed how guilty you feel when you choose your happiness over someone else's comfort? When you set a boundary and stick to it? When you pursue your dreams instead of living the life others planned for you? This guilt isn't natural. It's programmed. And Schopenhauer saw exactly who benefits from your self-sacrifice and why they need you to feel terrible about living authentically. The German philosopher spent years studying what he called the will to live, the blind force that drives all human behavior. But he discovered something disturbing about how this will operates in society. Most people aren't living their own will. They're living everyone else's. They've been conditioned to feel guilty about their own desires, their own needs, their own authentic choices. They've been trained to believe that self-care is selfishness, that boundaries are cruelty, that choosing themselves is somehow wrong. But here's what Schopenhauer understood that most people never realize. Your guilt about living your own life isn't coming from your conscience. It's coming from a system that needs your compliance, your energy, your sacrifice to function. Every time you feel guilty for choosing yourself, you're feeling the weight of other people's expectations, not your own moral compass. If you want to understand why living authentically feels so guilt-inducing, and how to break free from the psychological chains that keep you serving everyone but yourself, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our philosophical insights that can liberate you from inherited guilt forever. Today, I'm going to show you the 4 ways this guilt operates to control you, and more importantly, how Schopenhauer's wisdom can set you free from a lifetime of apologizing for being yourself. But I have to warn you, once you see how this manipulation works, once you understand where this guilt really comes from, you'll never look at your relationships, your choices, or your obligations the same way again. The first terrifying way guilt controls you is through what Schopenhauer identified as the morality of pity. Society teaches you that being a good person means constantly sacrificing yourself for others, that your worth is measured by how much you give, how much you endure, how little you ask for yourself. This isn't morality, it's manipulation disguised as virtue. Schopenhauer understood that true compassion doesn't require self-destruction. In fact, he argued that sustainable compassion is impossible when you're depleted, resentful, and running on empty. When you constantly sacrifice your well-being for others, you're not being noble. You're being used. And the guilt you feel when you try to stop this cycle isn't your conscience speaking. It's the manipulation working exactly as designed. Think about how you were taught to view selfishness, probably as the worst possible trait, something shameful and disgusting. But Schopenhauer saw through this conditioning. He understood that what society calls selfishness is often just basic self-preservation. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Choosing your mental health over someone else's comfort isn't cruel, it's intelligent. Pursuing your own goals instead of living everyone else's dreams isn't wrong, it's authentic. But you've been programmed to feel guilty about these natural, healthy choices because your compliance serves other people's interests. When you feel too guilty to say no, you become a reliable source of free labor, emotional support, and self-sacrifice. When you feel selfish for having needs, you become easier to exploit. When you feel wrong for wanting your own life, you become the perfect servant to everyone else's agenda. The guilt is the leash that keeps you obedient. It's not protecting your morality, it's protecting their access to your energy. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He understood that most of what passes for virtue in society is actually just guilt-induced compliance. People aren't kind because they want to be. They're kind because they're afraid of being seen as selfish. They don't help because it fulfills them. They help because guilt makes them feel they have no choice. This creates a twisted dynamic where your goodness becomes dependent on your misery. You can only feel like a good person if you're suffering, sacrificing, putting everyone else first. The moment you prioritize your own well-being, the guilt kicks in to remind you that good people don't do that. Good people endure. Good people give until it hurts. Good people never choose themselves. But Schopenhauer would ask you this: who benefits from your belief that goodness requires self-destruction? Who profits when you feel too guilty to have boundaries? Who gains when you're too ashamed of your own needs to pursue them? The answer isn't pretty, but it's necessary if you want to break free. The second shocking way guilt enslaves you is through what Schopenhauer called the illusion of moral debt. You've been taught that you owe the world something, that your very existence creates obligations you can never fully repay. This false debt keeps you in a permanent state of guilt-driven service, always trying to justify your right to exist through constant giving. This moral debt isn't real, but it feels real because it's been programmed into you from childhood. You owe your parents for raising you. You owe society for educating you. You owe your friends for their friendship. You owe your romantic partner for their love. You owe your employer for your job. According to this logic, you owe everyone everything, and you owe yourself nothing. Schopenhauer saw through this manipulation. He understood that gratitude doesn't require self-destruction. Appreciation doesn't demand the sacrifice of your authentic life. Love doesn't need you to disappear into service. The idea that you must pay for your existence through endless giving is a lie designed to extract maximum value from your life while giving you minimum fulfillment in return. Think about how often you feel like you have to earn your right to be happy, how you believe you must suffer before you deserve joy, how you think you need to prove your worth through sacrifice before you can pursue your own dreams. This is the moral debt talking, convincing you that your life belongs to everyone but you. But here's what Schopenhauer understood that guilt tries to hide from you. Your life is not a debt to be repaid. Your existence is not a burden to be justified. Your happiness is not a privilege to be earned through suffering. You don't owe anyone a life of misery in exchange for the right to exist. You were born with the same fundamental right to pursue fulfillment as everyone else, and no amount of guilt can change that truth. The people who benefit from your guilt want you to believe otherwise. They need you to feel indebted, obligated, constantly owing. Because when you feel like you owe them your life, they can claim ownership of your choices. When you believe your happiness must be earned through their approval, they gain control over your pursuit of fulfillment. When you think you must justify your existence through service to them, they get a lifetime of free labor from your guilt-driven compliance. Schopenhauer would tell you that the only debt you truly owe is to yourself. The debt to live authentically, to honor your own will, to pursue your own version of a meaningful life. Every moment you spend feeling guilty for existing is a moment stolen from the life you're actually meant to live. Every choice you make from guilt instead of authentic desire is a betrayal of your own potential. The guilt wants you to believe that choosing yourself is selfish, but Schopenhauer understood that abandoning yourself is the greatest selfishness of all. When you live inauthentically, when you sacrifice your true nature to appease others' expectations, you rob the world of your unique contribution. You cheat everyone, including those you think you're serving, out of the gift of your authentic presence. Leave in the comments. Have you ever felt guilty for putting your own needs first? How has this guilt shaped the choices you've made in your life? But here's where it gets even more disturbing. The third most insidious way guilt controls you is through what Schopenhauer recognized as the weaponization of your empathy. Your ability to feel others' pain, to understand their struggles, to care about their well-being becomes the very tool used to manipulate you into self-abandonment. Empathy is supposed to be a gift, a way to connect with others and contribute to collective well-being. But in a society built on exploitation, your empathy becomes your greatest vulnerability. Every time you feel guilty for disappointing someone, for not meeting their expectations, for choosing your own path over their preferences, your empathy is being used against you. Schopenhauer understood that true empathy doesn't require self-destruction. Genuine compassion doesn't demand that you sacrifice your authenticity to make others comfortable. Real love doesn't need you to become someone you're not. But you've been conditioned to believe that caring about others means caring nothing about yourself, that empathy requires the complete suppression of your own needs and desires. This creates a twisted dynamic where your capacity for love becomes your prison. The more you care, the more guilty you feel for having boundaries. The more empathetic you are, the easier it becomes for others to manipulate you through their emotional reactions to your authentic choices. Your kindness becomes the weakness that others exploit to keep you serving their agenda instead of living your own life. Think about how often you've changed your mind, abandoned your plans, or suppressed your needs because someone else seemed disappointed or hurt by your choices. Think about how many times you've felt guilty for causing someone discomfort, even when you were just being honest about your own limits. This is weaponized empathy in action, using your capacity for care against your right to authentic living. Schopenhauer saw that this manipulation works so well because it disguises exploitation as love. When someone makes you feel guilty for having boundaries, they're not showing you how much they care about you. They're showing you how much they need to control you. When your choices trigger guilt trips, emotional manipulation, or accusations of selfishness, you're not seeing love in action. You're seeing someone's will trying to dominate your own. The people who truly love you, Schopenhauer would argue, don't need you to betray yourself to prove your care for them. They don't require your self-destruction as evidence of your loyalty. They don't demand that you feel guilty for being authentic as proof of your goodness. Real love celebrates your autonomy, supports your authentic choices, and respects your right to live according to your own will. But exploitative relationships, whether with family, friends, romantic partners, or employers, depend on your guilt to function. They need you to feel bad about having needs, terrible about setting boundaries, wrong about choosing yourself. Because the moment you stop feeling guilty for being authentic, you become dangerous to anyone whose agenda requires your self-abandonment. This is why breaking free from guilt feels so scary. It's not just about changing your own life, it's about refusing to enable others' dependency on your self-sacrifice. When you stop feeling guilty for living authentically, you force everyone around you to either respect your autonomy or reveal their true intentions. Some will celebrate your growth, but others will escalate their guilt tactics, trying desperately to pull you back into the dynamic that served their interests. And here's what will absolutely shock you. The fourth and most devastating way guilt controls you is by convincing you that your authentic desires are somehow wrong or dangerous. Schopenhauer understood that society has a vested interest in making you afraid of your own will, your own wants, your own vision of a fulfilling life. You've been taught to distrust your instincts, to second-guess your desires, to feel guilty about wanting what you want. This isn't protection, it's control. When you're afraid of your own authentic impulses, when you feel guilty about your natural desires, you become dependent on external authority to tell you what's acceptable to want, what's okay to pursue, what's morally permissible to choose. Schopenhauer saw that this external authority doesn't have your best interests at heart. It has its own agenda. its own needs, its own vision of how your life should serve its purposes. When you feel guilty about wanting financial independence, you become more likely to accept exploitation. When you feel selfish for wanting creative fulfillment, you become more willing to sacrifice your artistic vision for others' approval. When you feel wrong for wanting emotional autonomy, you become easier to manipulate through guilt and obligation. This guilt about your authentic desires creates a split in your psyche. Part of you knows what you really want, what would truly fulfill you, what would make your life feel meaningful and authentic. But another part of you has been trained to feel ashamed of those desires, to see them as selfish, wrong, or inappropriate. This internal conflict keeps you paralyzed, unable to fully pursue what you want, but also unable to fully abandon it. Schopenhauer understood that this paralysis serves the interests of everyone except you. When you're too guilty to pursue your authentic desires, you become available to serve everyone else's agenda. When you're too ashamed of what you really want, you become dependent on others to define what's worthy of pursuit. When you're too afraid of your own will, you become the perfect servant to everyone else's. But your authentic desires aren't wrong. They're not selfish. They're not dangerous. They're the compass that could guide you toward a life of genuine fulfillment and meaning. The guilt you feel about them isn't your conscience protecting you from moral failure. It's conditioning, protecting others from losing access to your compliance service. Schopenhauer would tell you that the most moral thing you can do is honor your authentic will. Not the will that's been programmed into you by others' expectations, but the deep, true will that emerges when you strip away all the guilt, all the shoulds, all the inherited obligations. This authentic will isn't selfish because it's truly yours. It's not wrong because it emerges from your genuine nature. It's not dangerous because it seeks authentic expression, not domination over others. The guilt tries to convince you that following your authentic will makes you a bad person, but Schopenhauer understood the opposite is true. Abandoning your authentic will, living according to others' expectations, sacrificing your true nature to avoid guilt, that's what creates real moral failure. When you betray yourself to serve others' agendas, you become resentful, depleted, and ultimately unable to offer genuine love and support to anyone. Living authentically isn't selfish, it's sustainable. Following your true will isn't cruel, it's honest. Refusing to feel guilty for being yourself isn't wrong, it's necessary. Because the world doesn't need another guilt-driven servant, another self-sacrificing martyr, another person who's forgotten what they actually want. The world needs you to be courageously, unapologetically, authentically yourself. And this brings us to Schopenhauer's most liberating insight about guilt and authentic living. He understood that the guilt you feel for living your own life isn't a sign that you're being selfish. It's a sign that you're finally being real. It's evidence that you're breaking free from the conditioning that kept you serving everyone but yourself. It's proof that you're choosing authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, your own will over everyone else's expectations. The guilt doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're doing something different, something that threatens the established dynamic, something that forces others to confront their own dependence on your self-sacrifice. The guilt is the sound of your psychological chains breaking, the noise of liberation, the birth pains of authentic living. Schopenhauer saw that most people mistake this guilt for moral guidance when it's actually the opposite. It's the last desperate attempt of your conditioning to pull you back into compliance. It's the voice of everyone who benefited from your self-abandonment, trying to convince you that choosing yourself makes you a bad person. It's the echo of every guilt trip you've ever received, every manipulation you've ever endured, every time someone made you feel wrong for having needs. But you don't have to listen to that voice anymore. You don't have to let guilt determine your choices. You don't have to feel bad about living the life you actually want instead of the life others want you to want. You have the right to pursue your own vision of fulfillment without feeling guilty about it. You have the right to set boundaries without apologizing for them. You have the right to choose yourself without justifying that choice to anyone. This doesn't make you selfish. This makes you free. This doesn't make you cruel. This makes you honest. This doesn't make you wrong. This makes you authentically, courageously, beautifully yourself. And the people who truly love you, who genuinely want your well-being, who respect your autonomy, they'll celebrate this transformation. They'll support your journey toward authentic living. They'll be glad to see you finally choosing yourself. The others, the ones who need your guilt to control you, who depend on your self-sacrifice to serve their agenda, who require your self-abandonment to feel secure, they'll escalate their manipulation tactics. They'll try to make you feel more guilty, more selfish, more wrong for choosing authenticity. But their reaction isn't proof that you're making a mistake. It's proof that you're making progress. Schopenhauer spent his life refusing to feel guilty for thinking differently, for seeing clearly, for choosing his own path over society's expectations. He understood that authentic living requires the courage to disappoint others, to let them down, to refuse their demands for your compliance. He knew that freedom always comes with guilt, but that guilt is temporary while authenticity is liberating. The guilt you feel for living your own life will fade as you strengthen your commitment to authenticity. Each time you choose yourself despite the guilt, you weaken its power over you. Each boundary you maintain despite others' reactions, you prove to yourself that you can survive their disapproval. Each authentic choice you make, despite the conditioning that tells you it's wrong, you take another step toward genuine freedom. So stop apologizing for being yourself. Stop feeling guilty for having needs. Stop believing that your worth depends on your willingness to sacrifice your authenticity for others' comfort. You were not born to serve everyone else's agenda while abandoning your own. You were not put on this earth to feel guilty for existing, for wanting, for choosing yourself. Your life belongs to you. Your choices are yours to make. Your happiness is yours to pursue. The guilt that tries to convince you otherwise isn't protecting anyone's well-being. It's protecting everyone's access to your compliant service. And you don't owe anyone that level of self-abandonment, no matter how guilty they try to make you feel for choosing differently. If this video helped you recognize how guilt has been controlling your choices, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe for more philosophical insights that can free you from inherited conditioning. And tell me in the comments, what's one area of your life where you felt most guilty for choosing yourself? I'm curious to hear about your experience with breaking free from this programming. Because living authentically isn't selfish, it's necessary. And the guilt you feel for doing it isn't a sign that you're wrong. It's a sign that you're finally, courageously, beautifully free.